remember those mornings clearly. Even before the sun fully rose, I was awake, moving through my day with the quiet urgency of someone who believed that being busy equaled being alive. My house was full, not just of things, but of lists, reminders, unfinished tasks, and the weight of all I thought I should do. I'm Ingrid, and welcome to my corner of the internet. Here, I share stories about simple living, minimalism, and finding calm in a world that constantly asks us to do more than we can bear. If you're new here, thank you for being here. Today, I want to talk about something I lived through for years before discovering minimalism, the exhausting, relentless habit of trying to do it all. For most of my 20s and 30s, I wore busyness like a badge of honor. I believed that if I could wake early, work late, juggle responsibilities, and still somehow squeeze in personal goals, then I was succeeding. But looking back now, I see how heavy that pace really was, how quietly it stole my mornings, my energy, and even my joy. My home reflected it perfectly. Piles of papers, mismatched cups on the counter, clothes waiting to be folded, books stacked with good intentions that never became read pages. I thought keeping busy would make me feel accomplished, but all it did was make me tired, constantly restless, and emotionally drained. I was nearing my 40s then, and I didn't even realize how much of myself I had surrendered to the illusion of doing it all. I believed that slowing down would make me less valuable, that resting was a form of weakness. Even simple moments of pause felt like wasted time. I remember standing in my kitchen one morning, holding a cup of coffee I hadn't had time to savor. The sun was just beginning to stretch its light across the counter. And for a brief second, I thought, why do I feel so heavy when everything around me looks complete? It was one of the first moments I sensed that something was off. I had been measuring my worth by how much I could accomplish, by how many boxes I could tick in a day, and by how neatly I could keep my house in schedule. But no matter how many things I crossed off, there was still a persistent, gnawing feeling of emptiness. I used to wake up with my mind already racing lists of tasks, forming before my eyes, even before my eyes even fully opened. Mornings were no longer gentle. They were a to-do list I had inherited from yesterday and would carry into the next day. Each item checked off felt like a small victory, yes, but it was never enough to fill the quiet ache of living under constant pressure. And it wasn't just about tasks, it was about people too. I tried to be everything for everyone, the reliable friend, the supportive daughter, the ambitious worker, the thoughtful partner. I believed that if I could manage it all, I could avoid disappointment, conflict, or the fear that I was somehow failing at life itself. I look back now and see how unsustainable it was. I often laughed, but inside, I felt fragmented. My body carried tension, my mind carried worry, and my heart carried the silent hope that somehow, if I pushed hard enough, I could catch up to life itself. I had no idea then that the very thing I thought would keep me afloat doing it all was what kept me drowning. I wasn't living, I was running endlessly with no real destination except exhaustion. This is something I want you to hear today. Trying to do it all is not a badge of honor. It's a weight and it can be lifted. I wish I had known that when I was in my late 30s. I wish someone had gently told me that slowing down, pausing, and letting go of the impossible expectation to do everything could actually bring peace. That realization didn't come quickly. It didn't arrive with a single moment of clarity or an epiphany. It came slowly, as I noticed how tired I was, how cluttered my home felt, and how often I felt invisible, not to the world, but to myself. I started to see the pattern, the endless busyness, the guilt of resting, the desire to be everything for everyone. It was a cycle I had inherited from expectations, society, and even my own fears. I realized that my energy, time, and presence were finite, and yet I had been spending them as if they were limitless. It was then that I began to understand the cost of doing it all: my peace, my clarity, my joy, my presence. And slowly, I began asking myself the question that would change everything. What would happen if I let go of trying to do it all? This was the beginning of my journey toward minimalism. Not the aesthetic minimalism you might see on Instagram or Pinterest, the clean lines, the neutral colors, the perfectly arranged homes. No. This was a deeper, quieter minimalism, a letting go of the invisible clutter, the constant pressure, the unrelenting expectations, the belief that my worth was tied to productivity. It took time, patience, and countless gentle reminders to myself that slowing down didn't mean failing. It took learning to honor my own rhythm and my own limits. And slowly, the relief came almost imperceptibly at first, in the form of space to breathe, space to think, and space to simply be. I want to invite you to take a breath with me now. Imagine for a moment putting down one thing you've been trying to manage today. Imagine stepping out of the constant expectation that you must do everything perfectly. Imagine feeling the quiet relief of just being without judgment, without guilt. This was the first taste of what it felt like to let go, and it felt like coming home to myself for the first time in years. And so begins the story of how I learned to release the burden of doing it all, how minimalism became not just a lifestyle, but a tool for emotional freedom, presence, and joy. There were days when I felt like I was running on autopilot. I would wake, move through my routine, complete my tasks, and yet, by midday, I would feel the same weight pressing on my chest that had greeted me at sunrise. I remember one particular morning. It was early spring, the kind where sunlight spills gently across the kitchen counter, and the air still carries a faint chill. I had already brewed my coffee, organized a few things around the house, and glanced at my to-do list that seemed longer than the day itself. And yet, despite all the motion, all the accomplishments, all the little boxes checked, I felt empty, hollow, in a way I couldn't articulate to anyone else. It was in that emptiness that I began to notice something. The constant doing wasn't bringing fulfillment. It was only sustaining a cycle of exhaustion, guilt, and quiet anxiety. I had been so focused on managing everything, every chore, every expectation, every responsibility, that I had lost sight of what truly mattered to me. I used to believe that rest was unproductive, that pausing meant falling behind, that slowing down was a form of weakness. And because of that belief, I filled my hours with endless activity, meetings, errands, social obligations, side projects, each one justified as necessary, important, urgent. Looking back now, I can see the signs I ignored for so long, the headaches that lingered at the end of busy days, the nights when I lay awake, scrolling, thinking, planning, worrying, the quiet frustration at friends and family, not because they had done anything wrong, but because my mind was too full to really be present with them. I remember feeling a mix of shame and disbelief. Why was I so tired when I was doing everything right? Why did life feel like a series of boxes to check rather than moments to live? The tipping point didn't arrive in a dramatic moment. There was no crisis, no sudden collapse. It came in small, cumulative ways: a forgotten lunch, a skipped conversation with a friend, a fleeting but sharp pang of regret for a moment I hadn't fully experienced because I was too busy doing. I realized that my life had become a cycle of motion without presence. I was moving, but I wasn't living. And then came the quiet, almost imperceptible questioning. Is this really all there is? I began noticing the moments I was missing: the sun rising, the laughter of a loved one, the soft scent of coffee in the morning because I was too preoccupied with the next task, the next responsibility, the next expectation. There was a deep sadness in recognizing that I had let this rhythm continue unchecked for so many years. It wasn't just about busyness, it was about the subtle erosion of joy, peace, and connection. Every time I said yes to something external, I said no to myself. It was during these quiet moments of reflection that I realized I had been carrying invisible clutter: responsibilities I didn't need, guilt I didn't deserve, expectations that were never mine to fulfill. And yet, I held onto them because I thought doing it all was what made me valuable. I began experimenting with small releases. A task postponed, a commitment declined, a quiet morning without a schedule. And though the first attempts felt terrifying, a subtle relief followed, a lightness I hadn't felt in years. I also began noticing how many things I had accumulated emotionally. Patterns of comparison, guilt, fear of judgment, and the constant striving for approval had cluttered my mind just as much as the physical clutter had filled my home. I realized that letting go wasn't just about things, it was about my relationship with time, expectations, and my own sense of worth. Some days I still struggled. The habit of overcommitting, overdoing, overthinking was ingrained. But each time I paused, reflected, and chose a gentler path, I felt a little freer, a little lighter, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, a new rhythm emerged. A rhythm not dictated by urgency, but by intention. A rhythm where I could choose what truly mattered and release what didn't. I remember the first time I truly felt the weight lift. It wasn't dramatic. It was the quiet relief of an afternoon spent simply being, reading a book, sipping tea, noticing the sunlight on the wall. No rush, no list, no guilt. Just me, present in my own life. That day, I understood something important. Letting go of doing it all isn't about laziness or failure. It's about reclaiming your life, your presence, your joy, your peace. And that realization changed everything. It wasn't a sudden transformation, but a gentle shift, a series of choices, moments, and breaths that gradually freed me from the pressure I had carried for decades. I began to see how minimalism could be more than tidy spaces and aesthetic simplicity. It was a mindset, a permission to step off the endless treadmill, and a reminder that life is meant to be lived, not managed. And as I reflect on those years of trying to do it all, I am grateful for the lessons, for the exhaustion that led me to awareness, and for the slow, quiet path that eventually brought me back to myself. This was the first step in a journey that would teach me how to live lightly, how to prioritize what truly matters, and how to discover joy in presence rather than productivity. There came a morning when I realized that my life could not continue at the pace I had been living. The exhaustion, the constant mental chatter, the endless obligations, it had become impossible to ignore. I was tired in a way that no cup of coffee, no completed checklist, no fleeting moment of achievement could fix. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, the sunlight spilling across the counter, the steam rising from my untouched cup of coffee. I was looking at the tasks ahead, the responsibilities waiting to be tackled, and I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Fear. Fear that I was living the wrong way. Fear that if I continued, I would wake up one day and realize I had missed my own life. And in that fear, a small, quiet thought emerged, a whisper, almost imperceptible at first. What if I didn't have to do it all? It was such a simple idea, and yet it felt revolutionary. I had spent so many years believing that life was a checklist, that happiness came from achieving, from performing, from constantly proving myself, and suddenly I was seeing the possibility that perhaps freedom, peace, and presence lay in the letting go. I didn't know exactly what that would look like. I didn't have a plan. I only knew that I could no longer continue to sacrifice my well-being, my calm, my connection to the present moment for the illusion of productivity. The first steps were small, tiny, almost invisible gestures of self-kindness. I began saying no to commitments that felt heavy instead of joyful. I stopped trying to manage everything at once and allowed myself to focus on one thing at a time. Even the simple act of letting a single unfinished task remain untouched felt like liberation. I started noticing the moments I had been missing for so long. The sunlight on my floor, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the way the steam curls from a freshly brewed cup of coffee. I began to understand that life wasn't meant to be a relentless march of responsibilities. It was meant to be lived, experienced, savored. It wasn't easy. Old habits die slowly. The pressure to prove myself, to maintain control, to meet expectations, it lingered. There were days when I reverted to the old patterns, when I felt the familiar pull of doing it all, of being everything for everyone. But each time I paused, each time I reminded myself that it was okay to let go, I felt a little lighter. I realized that this awakening, this recognition that life could be simpler, calmer, and more intentional was not just about slowing down. It was about learning to trust myself, to trust that my worth was not measured by my busyness, but by my presence, my attention, my care for myself, and for the people I loved. I began keeping a small journal. Each morning, I wrote down one thing I could let go of, a task, a worry, a tiny expectation. It wasn't dramatic, but it worked. Over time, I noticed a subtle shift. The world didn't fall apart when I released control. My energy felt lighter. My mornings became softer. My mind, for the first time in years, had space to breathe. This awakening was quiet, almost imperceptible at first. There was no sudden aha moment, no dramatic epiphany. It was a series of small realizations, gentle nudges from life itself that taught me freedom begins when we stop trying to carry everything ourselves. I remember a particular evening, sitting by my window with a cup of tea, watching the last light of day fade. The world outside was busy, as always, but inside there was stillness. And in that stillness, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years, a peace that came from giving myself permission to simply be. I realized then that minimalism wasn't just about things. It was about time, attention, and energy. It was about choosing what truly matters and releasing what doesn't. The clutter of life isn't only physical, it is mental, emotional, and spiritual. And letting go of that invisible clutter was the key to reclaiming my life. I began to practice small rituals of intentionality. A slow morning cup of coffee without scrolling through emails. A quiet walk with no destination. A single task approached with full attention rather than rushed through. Each act, no matter how small, was a reminder that I could live differently, gently, deliberately, fully. And as these moments accumulated, I began to notice a shift in myself. My mind felt lighter. My heart felt fuller. My days, once heavy with obligation, began to carry space for joy. I realized that the more I let go, the more I could experience life not as a series of tasks, but as a series of moments. Perhaps the most important lesson of this awakening was this: doing less doesn't mean achieving less. It means living more. It meant showing up for myself in ways I had long neglected. It meant learning to say no without guilt. It meant trusting that by letting go of some things, I was making room for what truly mattered. This awakening marked the beginning of a journey that would teach me about the power of simplicity, the depth of presence, and the beauty of letting go. And while the path wasn't always easy, it was the first time I felt alive in a way that wasn't dictated by busyness or expectation. After that first quiet realization, I began taking small steps toward letting go. I didn't overhaul my life overnight. Change I learned rarely happens all at once. Instead, I focused on tiny, deliberate actions that honored my well-being and reclaimed my time. One of the first things I did was evaluate my commitments. I looked at my calendar, my lists, the obligations I had accepted out of habit rather than intention. I asked myself gently, which of these truly matters? Which can wait? Which can be released entirely? It was uncomfortable at first. Saying no, even to small things, felt foreign. There was a lingering fear that someone would be disappointed, that I would miss an opportunity, that I was somehow failing. But I learned to trust the quiet voice inside me, the one that reminded me that my energy is finite and protecting it is not selfish. I also began simplifying my environment. My home had always been full, not in a visually overwhelming way, but with items that carried obligations, memories, and unfinished intentions. I realized that physical clutter mirrored my mental clutter. Letting go of some things, even a single drawer or a shelf, gave me a tiny sense of relief and control. With each small release, I felt a subtle shift. A drawer cleared, a task postponed, a commitment declined. Each one whispered the same truth. I could live with less and still feel complete. The early days were not without challenges. Old habits and thoughts crept back in. The voice that told me I should be doing more, that I was being lazy, that I was falling behind, it lingered like a shadow. I learned to notice it without judgment, to recognize it as just another part of the mental clutter I was learning to release. I began integrating small rituals into my mornings and evenings. A slow cup of tea without checking messages, journaling a few thoughts before bed, sitting quietly on my balcony, noticing the world without the pressure to produce or manage. These moments became anchors, gentle reminders that life could be lived differently, intentionally, with presence, without constant busyness. One of the earliest and most profound rewards was clarity. My mind, once cluttered with endless to-dos, began to feel spacious. I could focus on one thing at a time, fully, without the constant pressure of what was next. Even mundane tasks, like washing dishes or folding laundry, became opportunities to be present rather than chores to escape. I also began noticing a deep emotional shift. The anxiety, restlessness, and constant feeling of being behind slowly loosened their grip. I felt lighter, calmer, and more connected not just to my surroundings, but to myself. The constant need to prove my worth through action gave way to a quiet confidence. I was enough simply as I was. Another important step was redefining productivity. I stopped measuring my value by how much I could do or how busy I appeared. Instead, I began valuing presence, intention, and focus. Doing one thing well, mindfully, became far more meaningful than attempting 10 things poorly in a rush. I started to notice subtle patterns in my relationships too. By letting go of the compulsion to do it all, I could truly listen and be present with the people I cared about. Conversations became richer, moments became more meaningful, and I realized that time spent in genuine connection was far more rewarding than any task completed. There were also moments of resistance. Friends or colleagues didn't always understand why I was slowing down. Sometimes I questioned myself, wondering if I was being irresponsible or lazy. But each time I returned to the quiet, grounding practices I had established, I was reminded that letting go is not giving up. It is reclaiming your life. Slowly, the rewards became undeniable. I had energy to enjoy my mornings. I experienced joy in small, previously unnoticed moments, the warmth of sunlight on my hands, the smell of fresh coffee, the rhythm of birds outside my window. I discovered that freedom comes not from doing more, but from doing less with intention. And so, this awakening was not a single event. It was a gentle unfolding, a quiet transformation that began in my mind, rippled through my environment, and eventually touched every part of my life. I began to see that minimalism was not just about possessions. It was about creating space for presence, clarity, and meaning. I want you to imagine with me for a moment a life where the weight of doing it all is lifted, where your mornings are calm, your mind is clear, and your presence is fully yours. A life where you can focus on what truly matters without the constant pull of unnecessary obligations. This is what the awakening feels like: small, quiet steps that gradually free you from the pressure, the busyness, and the constant noise. And while the journey is ongoing, even the first steps bring a sense of relief that is both profound and deeply nourishing. As we come to the close of this conversation, I want to leave you with a simple reminder. Letting go of the pressure to do it all is not giving up. It is choosing yourself, your presence, and your peace. Minimalism is not just about tidying our homes or owning less. It's about creating space, space to breathe, space to reflect, space to connect with the people and moments that truly matter. It's about learning that freedom, joy, and clarity live not in constant motion, but in intentional, mindful living. Take what you need from this journey, one small step at a time. Let yourself release what no longer serves you. Trust that life can be simpler, slower, and infinitely more fulfilling than you've allowed yourself to imagine. Thank you for spending this time with me today, for breathing, reflecting, and choosing to embrace the quiet, gentle path of living fully with less. I hope you carry a little more peace into your day, a little more clarity into your choices, and a little more joy into your moments. If this conversation resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe, join me on this journey, and continue exploring the art of simple, intentional living together. And remember, it is never too late to slow down, to release, and to step into a life that feels like home.